baby's cries tore through the stone corridors of Schattenfest at 3 in the morning, and not a single soul moved to comfort him. Alpha Dietrich von Eisenwolf stood at his chamber window, fists clenched white against the sill, listening to his 6-month-old son wail in the nursery 3 floors below. The pack law was clear. A bastard child bore no claim to pack resources, no right to the Alpha's time, no protection under the blood oath that bound their kind. And everyone believed little Heinrich was exactly that. Bastard. The shameful product of a dead servant girl and their Alpha's moment of weakness. They were all wrong. And before this night ended, the entire Northern Territory would learn just how catastrophically wrong they'd been. Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because what you're about to hear will shatter everything you thought you knew about forbidden bloodlines and the terrible price of hidden royalty. Dietrich pressed his forehead against the cold glass, every fiber of his being screaming to go to his son, to lift Heinrich from that cold cradle and hold him until the crying stopped. But he couldn't. Not yet. The royal decree that had forced him into this nightmare had been explicit: reveal nothing until the appointed hour, or watch the entire Eisenwolf bloodline burn under the Inquisition's torch. So he stood frozen, listening to his child's desperate cries echo off ancient stone, and remembered the night 18 months ago when everything had changed. Her name had been Adelind von Mondsilber. Not a servant. Not a peasant. Not some foolish girl who'd warmed the Alpha's bed for a season. She had been the crown princess of the Eastern Realm, third in line to the high throne, bearer of the Mondsilber bloodline that stretched back 700 years to the first shifting. And she had come to Schattenfest in secret, disguised in servant's rags, fleeing an assassination attempt that had already claimed her 2 older siblings. The Pack Council didn't know. Dietrich's own beta didn't know. The elaborate deception had been ordered by the High King himself, sealed with a blood oath so binding that even speaking her true name would have killed Dietrich where he stood. He could still see her as she'd been that first night, pretending to scrub floors in the great hall, her silver blonde hair hidden beneath a kerchief, those luminous amber eyes downcast. He'd known immediately she wasn't what she seemed. An Alpha always knew. But he'd said nothing, played along with whatever game she was running, curious about what would bring someone of obvious breeding into his fortress wearing rags. It had taken 3 weeks for her to trust him enough to tell the truth. 3 weeks of watching her move through his household, noting the way her hands trembled when she carried trays, how she flinched at sudden noises, the way her eyes constantly tracked exits and shadows. 3 weeks of falling completely, irrevocably in love with a woman whose real name he didn't even know. The night she'd finally broken down and told him everything, they'd been in the North Tower, his private sanctuary where the Pack Council never ventured. She'd collapsed against his chest, the carefully constructed servant persona shattering, and gasped out her true identity between sobs. The assassination. The poison that had killed her brother. The arranged marriage she was fleeing. A political union with the vampire lord of the southern wastes that would have ended the Mondsilber line forever through calculated interbreeding until the wolf was bred out entirely. "They want to erase us," she'd whispered against his throat. "My father thinks he's securing peace. He doesn't understand they want our bloodline extinct. They want our shifting magic gone from the world." Dietrich had held her tighter, breathing in her scent, moonflowers and winter frost and something indefinable that made his wolf howl with recognition. "Then stay here. I'll protect you. Blood oath or not, political alliance or not, stay." And she had. For 7 perfect months, Adelind had remained hidden in Schattenfest, disguised as a servant named Greta, and Dietrich had loved her with an intensity that terrified him. They'd been careful, so careful, meeting only in the deepest night, in chambers where no pack member ever ventured. He'd learned everything about her. Her love of ancient poetry, the way she hummed old lullabies when she thought no one could hear, her fierce intelligence and fiercer compassion. And when she'd told him she was pregnant, 3 months into their hidden affair, they'd both known the danger had just multiplied tenfold. The baby would be of mixed bloodline, Eisenwolf and Mondsilber, 2 of the most powerful shifting families in existence. The child would be royalty twice over. And if anyone discovered the truth before the political situation resolved, Both mother and child would be killed. Not out of cruelty but out of cold necessity. The vampire alliance hinged on Adelind having no heirs. Her father had already signed the contracts. A pregnant runaway princess would start a war that would consume 3 territories. So they'd made a terrible choice. They would hide the pregnancy, and when the baby came, they would claim it was the child of a servant who'd died in childbirth. Dietrich would publicly accept responsibility, letting his pack believe he'd been foolish enough to bed and impregnate a human servant. His reputation would take the hit, but the baby would live. Adelind would continue her disguise for a few more months, until her father's spies finally called off the search and she could safely reveal herself. Should have worked. It would have worked. If Adelind hadn't started hemorrhaging 3 hours after Heinrich was born. Dietrich had held her in that secret chamber while her blood soaked through blanket after blanket. Her face going paler than moonlight, her breathing shallow and desperate. She'd gripped his hand with terrifying strength and made him swear. Swear on his Alpha's oath, swear on his very soul, that he would protect Heinrich no matter what came. That he would never reveal the boy's true heritage until the time was right. That he would endure whatever hatred, whatever scorn, whatever cruelty came from his pack's belief that the child was a shameful bastard. "Promise me," she'd gasped, her lips already turning blue. "Promise me you'll let them think the worst of you. Promise me you'll bear it. For him. For our son." And Dietrich had promised. Then he'd watched the love of his life bleed out in his arms, unable to summon a healer without revealing everything, unable to save her without destroying the very future she'd died to protect. He'd burned her body himself in the old way, in the deep forest where no one would see the smoke. He'd scattered her ashes in the river. And he'd returned to Schattenfest with a squalling newborn and a story about a servant girl named Greta who died bringing the Alpha's bastard into the world. The pack's reaction had been immediate and vicious. Beta Adelhard had been the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "You dishonor your position. You dishonor the bloodline. A human servant. Have you lost your mind?" The pack council had been even harsher. Elder Brunhild, ancient and sharp as broken glass, had actually spat at his feet. "That child has no place here. Send it to the human orphanages. Let the humans deal with your mistake." But Dietrich had refused, even as his heart shattered. "He's mine. He stays." And so began the nightmare that had lasted 6 months. The pack had accepted Heinrich's presence, but only barely. No one would help with the child. No nursing mothers would feed him. No caregivers would tend him. Dietrich had hired human servants to handle the day-to-day care, but even they looked at him with pity and disdain. A powerful Alpha brought low by his own base desires. The worst part was the night crying. Pack law stated that a bastard child, a child born outside recognized bonds, especially of mixed human blood, received no pack comfort. If the baby cried at night, he cried alone. To comfort him would be to acknowledge him as pack, and the council had been explicit. Heinrich was not pack, would never be pack, was tolerated only because the Alpha claimed him. So 3 nights a week, sometimes 4, little Heinrich would wake in the dark hours and scream. And Dietrich would stand in his chambers, every Alpha instinct howling at him to go to his child, and force himself to remain still. Force himself to honor the terrible promise he'd made to a dying princess. Force himself to endure while his son cried for comfort that pack law forbade anyone to give. Tonight was the worst it had ever been. Heinrich had been crying for 40 minutes straight. His wails growing hoarse and desperate. Somewhere in the lower levels, Dietrich could hear pack members stirring, complaining about the noise. Someone, it sounded like young Erhardt, shouted something crude about putting the bastard outside for the night. Laughter followed. Dietrich's wolf surged to the surface, demanding blood. His eyes flashed gold in the darkness. His hands began to shift, claws extending. And then silence. Heinrich stopped crying mid-wail, the sound cutting off so abruptly that Dietrich's heart seized in his chest. He was moving before thought caught up to instinct, tearing his chamber door open and racing down the corridor toward the nursery. The blood oath be damned. The royal decree be damned. If someone had hurt his son. He smashed through the nursery door, prepared for violence, prepared to tear apart whoever had dared touch his child. Instead, he found Astrid von Nebelgeist standing beside Heinrich's cradle, the baby cradled gently in her arms, her expression unreadable in the candlelight. Astrid, the pack's foremost historian, keeper of the bloodline records, a woman ancient beyond telling, who spoke rarely and saw everything. She looked up as Dietrich entered, and her eyes glowed with an eerie silver light. You've been keeping secrets, Alpha. Dietrich's blood turned to ice. I don't know what you. Don't. Her voice cracked like a whip. Don't insult us both with lies. I've known since the moment you brought this child home. Did you think I wouldn't recognize the Mondsilber bloodline? That I wouldn't see the crown princess's features in this baby's face? The world tilted. Dietrich grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. You can't, the blood oath prevents you from speaking of it. Not me. Astrid looked down at Heinrich, who had quieted completely in her arms. His tiny fist wrapped around her finger. I've watched you suffer for 6 months, Alpha. Watched you endure your pack's scorn while this child cried. I wondered how long you'd last before you broke. Why didn't you say anything? Dietrich's voice came out raw. Because I was waiting for the appointed hour. Astrid smiled, sharp and knowing. The blood oath expires at dawn on the child's half-year anniversary. Did you even realize? At sunrise today, 3 hours from now, you're free to speak the truth. Dietrich stared at her, then at the ancient clock on the wall. She was right. 6 months to the day since Heinrich's birth. 6 months since Adelind had died. The blood oath, sealed for half a year's time, was almost expired. 3 more hours. 3 more hours and he could tell them everything. Could clear his son's name. Could ensure Heinrich received the treatment, the protection, the honor that was his birthright as crown prince of the Eastern Realm and heir to 2 of the most powerful bloodlines in existence. 3 more hours. Can you last that long? Astrid asked softly. Can you endure 3 more hours while your pack sleeps soundly, ignorant of the royalty they've been spurning? Dietrich's jaw clenched. I've lasted 6 months. Then last 3 more hours. She handed Heinrich back to him, the baby now sleeping peacefully. But Alpha, when dawn comes and you finally tell them the truth, this pack is going to tear itself apart with shame. And there will be hell to pay from the Eastern Realm when they learn what we've done to their crown prince. She left him there, standing in the nursery with his sleeping son, the weight of the coming revelation settling over him like a shroud. 3 hours until dawn. 3 hours until everything changed. Dietrich carried Heinrich back to his own chambers. Pack law be damned at this point, and settled into his chair by the fire with his son against his chest. Heinrich slept on, oblivious to the storm that was coming. In the firelight, Dietrich could see it clearly now. How much his son looked like his mother. The shape of his eyes. The set of his mouth. The way his hair, even at 6 months old, held that distinctive silver-blonde shimmer of the Mondsilber line. How had anyone not seen it? But then no one had been looking. They'd all been too busy believing the worst, too ready to assume their Alpha had fallen to base lust with a human servant. Confirmation bias, Astrid would have called it. They saw what they expected to see. And they'd treated the crown prince of the Eastern Realm like unwanted trash. Dietrich held his son closer and began to plan. At dawn, he would gather the entire pack. He would tell them everything. The truth about Adelind, the assassination attempts, the political machinations that had forced them into hiding. He would show them the documentation Adelind had hidden in his chambers, the sealed letters bearing the High King's personal crest, the bloodline certificates, the royal decrees. And then he would watch them realize what they'd done. The pack that had let a crown prince cry through the night. That had scorned and mocked the heir to the high throne. That had treated their future king like he was worth less than dirt. Yes, there would be hell to pay. But 3 hours was a long time and Dietrich was a practical man. He knew his pack. Knew how they'd react to the revelation. And he knew that the Eastern Realm's response would be swift and brutal. The insult to their crown prince, even unintentional, would demand restitution. Blood restitution. The knock came at his chamber door 90 minutes before dawn. Dietrich wasn't surprised. He'd been waiting for this. Enter. Beta Adelhard stepped inside, his expression troubled. He stopped short when he saw Heinrich sleeping against Dietrich's chest. You brought the child to your chambers. My son, Dietrich corrected coldly. His name is Heinrich. Use it. Adelhard's face flushed. Pack law will be irrelevant in approximately 90 minutes. Dietrich met his beta's eyes steadily. So I suggest you save whatever lecture you've prepared. You're going to want those words back soon enough. Something in his tone made Adelhard pause. What's happening at dawn? The truth. Dietrich smiled without humor. The blood oath expires at sunrise. And when it does, I'm going to tell you exactly who Heinrich's mother was. And then I'm going to watch you realize what this pack has done. Adelhard's eyes narrowed. The servant girl. Greta. What about her? There was no servant girl named Greta. Dietrich spoke each word precisely, watching them land like blows. That was a cover story. Heinrich's mother was Crown Princess Adelinde von Mondsilber, third in line to the high throne, and she died in my arms 6 months ago after making me swear to hide our son's identity until the blood oath expired. The color drained from Adelhard's face. You're lying. Am I? Dietrich stood carefully, keeping Heinrich secure against his chest. In 90 minutes, I'll prove every word. I'll show you the documents, the letters from the High King, the bloodline certificates, and then you're going to understand exactly what you've done. What this entire pack has done. The baby that's been crying through the nights, Adelhard's voice strangled off, is the crown prince of the Eastern Realm, heir to the Mondsilber bloodline, royal blood twice over. Dietrich's smile was savage now. The baby you've all been ignoring, spurning, letting scream in the dark because pack law said he was just a bastard? That's your future king. And you've been treating him like garbage for 6 months. Adelhard sat down heavily, his face gone gray. The Eastern Realm will destroy us. Yes, Dietrich agreed simply. They probably will. When they learn that their crown prince has been neglected, scorned, denied pack comfort while he cried through the nights. When the High King discovers that his grandson, his only surviving heir, has been treated like he's worth less than the dirt beneath our feet. He shrugged. I'd prepare for war if I were you. But you could have told us. Blood oath. Dietrich cut him off. Sealed by the High King himself. If I'd spoken Adelinde's true name, if I'd revealed Heinrich's heritage before the appointed time, the magic would have killed me instantly. And then what protection would my son have had? So I endured. I let you all think the worst of me. I let you treat my son like a shameful mistake. Because that was the only way to keep him alive until this moment. Adelhard stared at him for a long moment. The others need to know. Before dawn. We need to prepare. No. Dietrich's voice was iron. They learn at dawn with everyone else. They don't get advance warning. They don't get time to prepare speeches or excuses. They're going to face this cold, exactly as I've faced their scorn for 6 months. But the pack made their choice when they let my son cry alone in the dark. Dietrich's eyes flashed gold. Now they live with the consequences. Adelhard left, moving like a man in a nightmare, and Dietrich settled back into his chair. Heinrich stirred against his chest but didn't wake. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to lighten, that deep blue-black that came before true dawn. 1 more hour. The pack began to stir as dawn approached. Dietrich could hear movement throughout Schattenfest, the usual morning sounds of a wolf pack waking. He dressed carefully, still keeping Heinrich close, and made his way down to the great hall. Servants were already lighting the massive fireplaces, preparing for the day. He sent runners to wake everyone. Full pack assembly. Mandatory. In the great hall. Now. They came reluctantly, confused by the early summons. Dietrich watched them file in. The pack council, the warriors, the elders, the young ones barely past their first shift. 200 wolves, give or take. His pack. His family. The people who'd scorned his son for 6 months. Elder Brunhild was the last to arrive, moving slowly with her cane. She took one look at Heinrich in Dietrich's arms and scowled. "What's this about, Alpha? Why is the bastard child?" "His name," Dietrich interrupted, his voice carrying through the hall, "is Heinrich Adalbert von Mondsilber, Crown Prince of the Eastern Realm, heir to the high throne, and bearer of both the Eisenwolf and Mondsilber bloodlines." Silence crashed through the hall like a physical force. Dietrich continued, each word precise and cold. 6 months ago, Crown Princess Adelind von Mondsilber died in my arms after giving birth to our son. She'd been hiding here, disguised as a servant, fleeing an assassination attempt and a forced marriage that would have ended her bloodline. We fell in love. She became pregnant. And when the danger to her life became too great, we made a terrible choice. We decided to hide our son's true heritage until the political situation resolved. He could see comprehension beginning to dawn on some faces, horror on others. The High King sealed the deception with a blood oath. I physically could not reveal the truth until this morning, when the oath expired at dawn. So I let you all believe Heinrich was the product of a shameful liaison with a human servant. I let you think I'd been weak, foolish, irresponsible. I endured your scorn, your judgment, your barely concealed contempt. All to protect my son. Elder Brunhild had gone pale as old bone. And you, Dietrich turned his gaze on her, on all of them. You treated the Crown Prince of the Eastern Realm like he was worth nothing. You refused him pack comfort. You let him cry through the nights because pack law said a bastard child deserved no attention. You mocked him, scorned him. Some of you even suggested I should abandon him to a human orphanage. The horror was spreading now. Wolves beginning to understand the magnitude of what they'd done. "Astrid," Dietrich called. "Bring the documents." The ancient historian came forward with a wooden box, sealed with the High King's personal crest. She opened it carefully, spreading the contents across the high table. Letters, bloodline certificates, royal decrees, all bearing the unmistakable marks of authenticity. Magical seals that couldn't be forged, written in the High King's own hand. "It's all true," Astrid confirmed, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I verified the documents months ago. Every word the Alpha speaks is truth. This child is Crown Prince Heinrich von Mondsilber, heir to the high throne." Someone in the back made a sound like a wounded animal. "The Eastern Realm," Dietrich continued relentlessly, "will be notified of Heinrich's location and status today. They'll send representatives within the week. And they're going to ask very detailed questions about how their crown prince has been treated while residing with the Eisenwolf pack." Beta Adelhard's voice was barely a whisper. "They'll destroy us." "Probably," Dietrich agreed. "The insult alone would justify war. The fact that you let their crown prince cry unanswered through dozens of nights. That you denied him pack comfort, pack protection, basic consideration." He shrugged. "I'd expect nothing less than complete restitution. Blood restitution, most likely." Elder Brunhild had sunk into a chair, her cane clattering to the floor. "We didn't know. Does that matter?" Dietrich's voice was sharp as a blade. "You didn't know because you never questioned your assumptions. You saw what you wanted to see. A shameful Alpha and his bastard mistake. You never once considered that there might be more to the story. Never showed basic compassion to an innocent child." He looked around the hall, meeting eyes that couldn't hold his gaze. "I want you all to think about that. Think about every night you heard Heinrich crying and did nothing. Every time you saw him and made a snide comment. Every moment you treated him as less than pack. And then I want you to imagine explaining that to the High King." The silence was absolute. "Assembly dismissed," Dietrich said quietly. "I have a letter to write to the Eastern Realm." They dispersed slowly like people moving through water. Dietrich watched them go, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. They deserved this. Every moment of horror and shame and fear. They deserved it all. Adelhard approached as the hall cleared. "What will you tell the High King?" "The truth." Dietrich adjusted Heinrich in his arms. "That his grandson has been safe and protected in my care, if not always comfortable. That the deception was necessary and maintained perfectly. That I honored the blood oath to the letter. And about the pack's treatment of him, also the truth." Dietrich met his beta's eyes. "I won't lie to protect people who showed my son no mercy." "They'll execute the council," Adelhard said hoarsely. "Maybe more. Then they'll execute the council." Dietrich felt no pity. Actions have consequences. They made their choices. Now they face what comes. He left Adelhard standing there and retreated to his study. At his desk, he laid Heinrich carefully in a cushioned basket, one he'd commissioned weeks ago, far nicer than the simple cradle the pack had seen. Then he pulled out parchment and began to write. "To His Majesty, High King Friedrich von Mondsilber, Sovereign of the Eastern Realm, Guardian of the ancient bloodlines." The letter took him 2 hours to write properly. He detailed everything: Adeline's arrival, their relationship, her pregnancy and death, the blood oath, the necessary deception. He described Heinrich's health and development. And yes, he included the pack's treatment of the boy, though he worded it carefully. Accurately but carefully. By the time he sealed the letter with his Alpha's mark, the sun was fully up and Schattenfest was in chaos. Word had spread beyond the pack assembly. Servants were whispering in corners. Warriors were gathering in tense clusters. The pack council had locked themselves in the council chambers and weren't responding to anyone. Dietrich sent his fastest runner with the letter, along with 2 warriors as escort. Directly to the High King. No one else. "You have 3 days to reach the eastern capital. Move." They left at a run, and Dietrich returned to his chambers with Heinrich. The baby was awake now, making small sounds and waving his tiny fists. Dietrich fed him, changed him, played with him. All the normal routines of fatherhood that had been so complicated for 6 months. The knock came at midday. "Come." The entire pack council filed in, 8 elders including Brunhild, all looking like they'd aged a decade in 6 hours. Elder Werner spoke first, his voice shaking. "Alpha, we've come to. We need to." He couldn't seem to find the words. Elder Brunhild found them. "We beg your forgiveness. And the crown princes. We were wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. And we will accept whatever punishment the Eastern Realm decrees." Dietrich looked at them for a long moment. "It's not my forgiveness you need. It's his." He nodded toward Heinrich. "When he's old enough to understand what you did, you can beg his pardon. Until then, you can live with the knowledge of how badly you failed." "The High King will demand blood restitution," Elder Thaddeus said quietly. "We understand that. We're prepared to offer ourselves, if it will spare the rest of the pack." "Noble," Dietrich cut him off. "But I don't think that's how this will go." "What do you mean?" "The High King isn't cruel. Harsh, yes. Demanding of respect, absolutely. But not cruel." Dietrich stood, cradling Heinrich. "I wrote the truth in my letter, that the deception was necessary and maintained for Heinrich's safety. That while the pack's treatment was unfortunate, it stemmed from ignorance, not malice. That no actual harm came to the crown prince beyond some discomfort." Hope flickered in their faces. "However," Dietrich continued, and the hope died, "there will be consequences. The High King won't let this pass without some form of restitution. You insulted his heir. That demands a response." "What kind of response?" Brunhild asked. "I don't know," Dietrich admitted. "We'll find out when his representatives arrive. Until then, I suggest you all think very carefully about how you treated Heinrich. About the example you set. About what it means to be part of a pack." They left, chastened and afraid, and Dietrich was finally alone with his son. He carried Heinrich to the window and looked out over Schattenfest. His territory. His pack. The people he'd sworn to protect and lead. The people who'd failed his son so completely. Your mother would be so angry with them, he murmured to Heinrich. But she'd also be proud of you. 6 months old and already causing political chaos. That's the Mondsilber blood. Heinrich gurgled, grabbing at his father's beard. The Eastern Realm's response came faster than expected. For days after Dietrich sent his letter, riders appeared at Schattenfest's gates bearing the High King's banner. Not an army, which was a good sign. But not a small delegation either. 20 riders, all in full ceremonial armor, led by a stern-looking woman with silver-shot hair and eyes like chips of amber ice. Dietrich met them in the great hall, Heinrich in his arms, the entire pack assembled behind him. The woman dismounted and approached, her gaze fixed on the baby. Crown Prince Heinrich von Mondsilber. The heir we thought lost. Her voice was thick with emotion. May I? Dietrich hesitated, then passed his son over. The woman cradled Heinrich with practiced ease, her stern expression cracking into something softer. He has her eyes. Adeline's eyes. You knew her. I was her guard captain. Before the assassination attempts forced her to flee. The woman's voice hardened again. I was supposed to protect her. And I failed. She spoke of you, Dietrich said quietly. Commander Hildegard. She said you were the only one she trusted completely. Hildegard looked up sharply. She told you about me. She told me everything. Dietrich met her eyes. I loved her. And she loved me. And our son is the proof of that love. Something in Hildegard's expression shifted. Not softening exactly but understanding. She looked down at Heinrich again, studying his features. The resemblance is remarkable. How no one saw it. They weren't looking, Dietrich said simply. They saw what they expected to see. And what they expected, Hildegard's voice dropped to something dangerous, led them to neglect the crown prince. The High King's letter detailed certain treatment, nights spent crying unanswered, denial of pack comfort, scorn and mockery. The pack behind Dietrich shifted uneasily. The circumstances were complicated, Dietrich began carefully. Were they? Hildegard handed Heinrich back to him, her eyes now scanning the assembled pack. Because from where I stand, it looks like a pack that failed in the most basic duty, protecting a child. They didn't know. Irrelevant. Hildegard's voice cracked like a whip. A child's suffering is a child's suffering, royal blood or not. That you all heard an infant crying night after night and did nothing. That's not a political failure. That's a moral one. Silence crashed through the hall. The High King, Hildegard continued, has issued his decree. He's reviewed the circumstances, the necessity of the deception, and the unfortunate ignorance of the pack. He acknowledges that Alpha Dietrich was bound by blood oath and acted with honor and in the crown prince's best interests. Relief flickered through the pack. However, Hildegard's voice hardened, there must be consequences for the treatment the crown prince endured. The High King has decreed the following. The Eisenwolf pack will pay tribute to the Eastern Realm for 3 years, a tithe of 10% of all resources, to demonstrate proper respect for the crown prince's bloodline. Painful but manageable. The pack could handle that. Additionally, Hildegard continued, the pack council is dissolved, effective immediately. Elder Brunhild, Elder Werner, Elder Thaddeus. You and your fellow council members are stripped of your positions. You failed in your duty to see clearly and act with compassion. You're demoted to the lowest pack ranks until such time as you prove yourselves worthy of trust again. Gasps echoed through the hall. 4 wolves of their age and status. This was a devastating blow. Furthermore, Hildegard wasn't done. Every member of this pack will undergo mandatory service rotation caring for Crown Prince Heinrich. You will all learn, personally and directly, what it means to nurture and protect the heir to the throne. And perhaps in doing so, you'll remember what it means to be pack. It was brilliant, Dietrich realized. Not cruel but absolutely effective. Force them all to confront what they'd failed to do. Make them build the bond they should have formed naturally. The High King also commands, Hildegard's voice softened slightly, that Crown Prince Heinrich remain here at Schattenfest for the foreseeable future. This is his home. Alpha Dietrich is his father and primary guardian. However, representatives from the Eastern Realm will be stationed here permanently to ensure the Crown Prince receives proper treatment and education befitting his status. Which meant oversight. But fair oversight. The High King wasn't removing Heinrich from his father, just ensuring he received proper care. Finally, Hildegard looked directly at Dietrich. The High King wishes to know if there are any other children of Princess Adeline's bloodline. Any other heirs he should be aware of. No, Dietrich said firmly. Heinrich is the only child. The only heir. Hildegard nodded slowly. Then the Mondsilber bloodline rests on his shoulders. No pressure. Her attempt at levity fell flat. The High King will arrive personally in 3 months' time to meet his grandson and assess the situation. I suggest you all spend that time proving you understand the magnitude of what was almost lost. She turned to address the pack directly. You heard a child crying in the dark and did nothing. Remember that feeling, that shame, the next time you're tempted to judge without understanding. The next time you see someone suffering and think it's not your concern. Because it could happen again. And next time, the consequences might be worse than loss of status. The pack council members were already removing their formal robes, their faces carefully blank. Brunhild moved like she'd been struck, but she didn't protest. None of them did. They knew they'd gotten off lightly. Hildegard stayed for 3 days, establishing the Eastern Realm's permanent presence at Schattenfest. She brought 4 guards, 2 royal tutors, and a historian to begin documenting Heinrich's bloodline and heritage. She also spent hours with Dietrich, learning everything about Adeline's final months. On the evening before she left, she found Dietrich in the North Tower, the same room where Adeline had first told him the truth. She was happy here, Hildegard said without preamble. I need you to know that. In all the years I served her at court, I never saw her smile the way she did in the letters she sent me from this place. She used a code, of course. Careful references that only I would understand. But the joy came through every word. Dietrich's throat tightened. I didn't know she'd been writing to you. Once a month like clockwork. Hidden in supply shipments, disguised as inventory lists. Hildegard moved to the window, looking out over the darkening forest. The last letter came 2 weeks before Heinrich was born. She told me she'd found something she never expected to find. True love. A partner who saw her as herself, not as a political piece to be moved around a board. She said you made her laugh. That you held her when she cried. That you never once tried to use her bloodline for your own gain. I loved her, Dietrich said simply. That was enough. For her too. Hildegard turned to face him. Which is why I need to tell you something the High King doesn't know. Something Adeline made me swear to keep secret until Heinrich was safe. Dietrich's instincts prickled. What secret? The assassination attempt that drove her into hiding. It wasn't random. It wasn't even primarily about the Vampire Alliance, though that was part of it. Hildegard's voice dropped. It was orchestrated by someone within the Eastern Court. Someone high-ranking enough to bypass royal security. Someone who wanted the Mondsilber heirs dead. The bottom dropped out of Dietrich's stomach. You're saying? I'm saying the threat isn't over. Whoever killed Adeline's siblings is still out there. Still in a position of power. And now that Heinrich's existence is known, now that the entire realm knows there's one surviving Mondsilber heir. Hildegard's eyes were hard. That makes your son a target again. Then he stays here, Dietrich said immediately. Schattenfest is defensible. My pack may have failed him once, but they won't again. Not now that they know what he is. That's what Adeline hoped you'd say. It's why she chose this place. Remote enough to hide, defensible enough to protect. Hildegard pulled a sealed envelope from her jacket. This is from her. Written the day before Heinrich was born. She made me promise to give it to you only after the blood oath expired and her son was publicly acknowledged. Dietrich took the letter with shaking hands. Adeline's handwriting. Her seal. He could almost smell her scent on the paper. Moonflowers and winter frost. Read it alone, Hildegard said quietly. And then we'll talk about security measures. Because the High King might be sending representatives for education and oversight, but I'm staying as Heinrich's personal guard. I failed to protect Adeline. I won't fail to protect her son. She left him there, and Dietrich broke the seal with careful fingers. The letter began simply, "My dearest Dietrich, my heart, my home." He had to stop reading after the first line, pressing the heel of his hand against his eyes to hold back tears. Then he forced himself to continue. "If you're reading this, then our son has reached his half-year and the blood oath has expired. If you're reading this, then I am gone because I would never have let anyone else give you this letter. And if you're reading this, then you've endured 6 months of letting our pack believe the worst of you, of watching Heinrich suffer the consequences of necessary deception, and somehow you've survived it. I'm so sorry, my love. Sorry for the burden I placed on you. Sorry for dying when you needed me most. Sorry for leaving you to face this alone. But I'm not sorry for loving you. I'm not sorry for Heinrich. Whatever comes, whatever you've had to endure, it was worth it. He was worth it. We were worth it. You need to know some things. Things I couldn't tell you while I lived, because the blood oath bound me as much as it bound you. The assassination that killed my siblings. It came from within the court. My father's own council harbors at least one traitor, possibly more. They want the Mondsilber line ended not because of the vampire alliance, but because our bloodline carries something they fear. We're the last carriers of the first shifting magic, Dietrich. The pure, untainted ability to shift that predates all the corrupted variations that exist now. Our bloodline can trace back to the original wolves, the ones who were blessed by the old gods themselves. Most shifters today carry diluted magic, weakened through generations of mixing and political breeding. But the Mondsilber line kept itself pure. And that purity makes us dangerous to those who want to control shifter magic. Heinrich carries this gift. I felt it when I carried him, felt the power coiling in his small body. He'll be stronger than any alpha alive when he comes into his full inheritance. Stronger than you, stronger than my father, stronger than anyone has been in 300 years. That's why they'll come for him. Not just because he's heir to the throne, but because they fear what he represents. A return to the old power. Power they can't control or manipulate. Protect him, Dietrich. Keep him safe at Schattenfest where the old magic still runs strong in the earth. Teach him to be wise as well as strong. And when the time comes, when the traitors reveal themselves, teach him to be ruthless. Love you. I loved you from the moment you saw through my servant disguise and said nothing, giving me space to reveal myself in my own time. I loved you when you held me through nightmares of my siblings' deaths. I loved you when you promised to protect our son no matter what it cost you. I love you still, even from beyond death. Tell Heinrich about me. Tell him his mother loved him more than life itself. Tell him she chose you, chose this pack, chose this life because it was real and true and worth more than all the politics and poison courts of the realm. Live well, my heart. Love again if you can, though I know you won't. And raise our son to be the king this realm needs. One who rules with strength and compassion in equal measure. Forever yours, Adeline. There's a second letter. Hidden in the north tower, behind the loose stone 3 feet to the left of the eastern window. Give it to Heinrich when he turns 16. He'll need it then. Dietrich sat motionless for a long time after finishing the letter, Adeline's words echoing in his mind. First shifting magic. A traitor in the High King's court. Heinrich more powerful than any living alpha. No wonder someone wanted the Mondsilber heirs dead. He found the loose stone exactly where Adeline had described. Behind it was another sealed letter, addressed in her handwriting, to my son Heinrich on his 16th birthday. Dietrich replaced it carefully and went to find Hildegard. She was in the barracks with her guards, reviewing security protocols. When she saw his face, she dismissed them immediately. "You read it. All of it. Including the part about the first shifting magic." Dietrich closed the door behind him. "How much does the High King know? About the magic?" "Everything. About the traitor in his court." Hildegard's jaw clenched. "He suspects, but he doesn't know who. That's why he's keeping Heinrich here rather than bringing him to the capital. At Schattenfest, the pool of potential threats is smaller, easier to monitor and control. So my son is bait. Your son is the future." Hildegard met his eyes steadily. "But yes, his existence will draw the traitors out. They'll have to move against him eventually. And when they do, we'll be ready. And if we're not ready enough..." Dietrich's voice was harsh. "If they get through, then they'll have to go through me first." Hildegard's hand rested on her sword hilt. "I failed Adelind. I won't fail Heinrich. That's not a dramatic promise, Alpha. That's a blood oath of my own. I'll die before I let anyone harm that child." The two of them stood there, understanding passing between them. Two people bound by love of the same woman, dedicated to protecting what she'd left behind. Over the next weeks, life at Schattenfest transformed. The mandatory care rotations began, and suddenly every member of the pack found themselves spending time with Crown Prince Heinrich. At first, they approached the duty with trepidation and shame, remembering how they'd scorned the crying baby. But Heinrich was 6 months old and had no memory of their failures. He smiled at them, laughed when they made silly faces, reached for them with tiny, trusting hands. And slowly, heart by heart, the pack fell in love with their future king. Elder Brunhild, demoted to the lowest rank and assigned the night shift, was the first to truly break. She'd spent 3 nights watching Heinrich sleep, standing guard over the cradle she'd once dismissed as holding nothing but a shameful bastard. On the 4th night, Heinrich woke crying, just normal baby fussiness, nothing serious, and Brunhild moved without thinking. She lifted him carefully, settled him against her shoulder, and began to hum an old lullaby. Heinrich quieted immediately, his small head heavy against her neck, and Brunhild felt something crack open in her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the baby who couldn't understand her words but might understand the tone. "I'm so sorry we failed you. I'm sorry we heard you crying and did nothing. I'm sorry we let our prejudices blind us to what should have been obvious, that you were loved, wanted, precious beyond measure." Heinrich made a small sound and grabbed a handful of her gray hair. Brunhild laughed through tears and held him closer. When Dietrich came to check on them an hour later, he found Brunhild asleep in the rocking chair, Heinrich peaceful against her chest, both of them breathing in sync. He didn't wake them. The transformation spread through the pack like wildfire. Warriors who'd sneered at the bastard child now competed for the honor of standing guard during Heinrich's outdoor time. Young wolves barely past their first shift begged for chances to play with him. Even the servants who'd been brought in from outside began to feel the shift, the way the pack's entire energy changed around the baby. This wasn't just the crown prince of the Eastern realm. This was their prince, their future, the child they'd almost lost through their own blindness. Beta Adelhard approached Dietrich 6 weeks after the Eastern Realm's decree. "The pack wants to hold a formal ceremony. A public acknowledgement of Heinrich as pack heir and crown prince. A chance to formally apologize and pledge their loyalty." Dietrich considered it. What kind of ceremony? The old kind. Blood oath witnessed by moon and stars. Every adult member of the pack pledging their life to Heinrich's protection. Adelhard's voice was steady. "We failed him once. This would be our promise that we'll never fail him again. That's a serious oath." "We're serious." Adelhard met his eyes. "We were wrong, Alpha. Catastrophically wrong. We want to make it right." The ceremony took place on the next full moon, in the ancient stone circle deep in Schattenfest's forest. 200 wolves gathered under silver light, and one by one, They came forward to kneel before Dietrich and Heinrich. Elder Brunhild went first, her voice strong despite her tears. I, Brunhild von Steinhers, pledge my life, my loyalty, and my protection to Crown Prince Heinrich von Mondsilber. I swear by moon and stars, by the old magic and the ancient ways, that I will guard him with my last breath. This I vow, witnessed by the pack and bound by blood. She drew a silver knife across her palm, let 3 drops of blood fall onto the stone at Heinrich's feet, and stepped back. One by one the others followed. Warriors and elders, young wolves and old, each making the same pledge, each sealing it with blood. By the time the last wolf had sworn, the stone was wet with crimson, and Heinrich, held in his father's arms through the entire ceremony, had fallen asleep, completely at peace, surrounded by the pack that had finally, truly claimed him. Hildegard, watching from the edge of the circle, felt something loosen in her chest. Adelind had been right. This was where Heinrich belonged. Not in the poisoned court of the eastern capital, but here with wolves who'd learned the hard way what it meant to truly see and protect their own. The peace lasted 3 months. 3 months of Heinrich growing stronger, happier, more connected to his pack. 3 months of Schattenfest settling into new rhythms, the shame of their failure fading into determination to do better. 3 months of Dietrich finally allowing himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. Then the High King arrived for his promised visit, and everything went to hell. King Friedrich von Mondsilber came with a full royal procession, 50 guards, a dozen advisors, and enough ceremonial pageantry to make it clear this was no casual family visit. This was the sovereign of the Eastern Realm inspecting the territory that housed his only heir. Dietrich met him at Schattenfest's gates with Heinrich in his arms and his entire pack assembled in formal ranks behind him. The display of unity was intentional, a clear message that the Eisenwolf pack stood together now, that they'd learned from their mistakes. The High King dismounted slowly, his eyes fixed on the baby. He was an imposing man, tall and broad-shouldered despite his age, with silver hair and the same distinctive amber eyes that Heinrich had inherited from his mother. When he stepped forward, every wolf in Schattenfest felt the weight of his power, pure ancient alpha authority that made even Dietrich's wolf want to submit. "Crown Prince Heinrich," the High King said softly, extending his hands. "My grandson. May I?" Dietrich passed Heinrich over carefully. The baby, now 9 months old and much more aware, studied the High King with serious eyes for a long moment. Then he smiled, that brilliant gap-toothed smile that had become famous throughout Schattenfest, and reached for his grandfather's beard. Something in the High King's stern expression cracked. Adelind did the same thing at this age. His voice was thick, grabbed my beard and laughed when I pretended to roar at her. He looked up at Dietrich, and there were tears in those ancient eyes. "Thank you for keeping him safe. Thank you for enduring what you endured to protect my daughter's child." "I loved her," Dietrich said simply. "There was nothing I wouldn't endure for her sake. For his." The High King nodded slowly, then turned to address the assembled pack. "I came here prepared to find fault, to judge harshly those who let my grandson suffer. But Commander Hildegard's reports have been illuminating. She tells me you've transformed, that you've acknowledged your failures and worked to correct them, that Crown Prince Heinrich is thriving under your care." Relief rippled through the pack. However, the High King's voice hardened. "There are still matters to address. Matters of security and succession. Matters that will determine Heinrich's future and the future of both our territories." He handed Heinrich back to Dietrich and gestured to his advisors. They came forward carrying document cases, maps, and what looked like intelligence reports. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private," Dietrich suggested, suddenly uneasy. "No." The High King's voice was iron. "Your pack swore blood oaths to protect my grandson. They deserve to hear what threatens him." The assembly was moved to the Great Hall, and what unfolded over the next hours was devastating. The High King's spies had been working tirelessly since Adelind's death, investigating the assassination attempts on the Mondsilber heirs. They'd uncovered a conspiracy that went deeper and darker than anyone had suspected. Lord Gottschalk von Rabenfels, the High King's most trusted advisor and closest friend of 30 years, was the traitor. He'd orchestrated the deaths of Adeline's siblings, arranged the vampire alliance specifically to trap her in a marriage that would dilute the bloodline, and when she'd fled, he'd sent assassins to hunt her down. But why? Dietrich's voice was raw. What could possibly justify? Power. The High King's face was carved from stone. The first shifting magic that runs in the Mondsilber blood. Gottschalk believed he could harness it, corrupt it, use it to create a new breed of shifter completely under his control. He needed the pure bloodline eliminated first, so there would be no one to oppose him when he implemented his plan. And now that Heinrich exists, now he's redoubled his efforts. The High King spread intelligence reports across the table. 3 attempts to infiltrate Schattenfest in the last month alone. All stopped by Hildegard's security measures, but they're getting bolder, more sophisticated. Hildegard stepped forward, her face grim. We've intercepted communications. Gottschalk is planning something big. A coordinated attack designed to breach Schattenfest's defenses and either capture or kill Heinrich. When? Dietrich's voice was deadly calm. Soon. Within the next 2 weeks. Hildegard pulled out a map marked with red X's. He's been positioning forces around your territory for months. Mercenaries, corrupted shifters, even some vampire allies willing to violate the treaty for the right price. When they move, it will be overwhelming force designed to crush any resistance. The pack behind Dietrich began to growl, low and dangerous. They'd sworn blood oaths. They'd pledged their lives. And now someone was threatening their prince. Then we prepare, Beta Adelhard said flatly. We fortify. We fight. You'd be slaughtered, the High King said bluntly. Gottschalk has been planning this for years. He has resources you can't match, forces you can't counter. Fighting here would be suicide. Then what do you suggest? Dietrich's grip on Heinrich tightened. We run. Hide again. No. The High King's eyes blazed gold. We end this. Permanently. But not by defending. By attacking. He laid out his plan, and it was audacious to the point of madness. Gottschalk believed Heinrich was at Schattenfest, heavily protected but essentially trapped. He was massing his forces for a siege, planning to starve them out or overwhelm their defenses. What he didn't know was that the High King had just arrived with 50 royal guards, elite warriors loyal beyond question. The plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. They would fake Heinrich's death. Stage an accident during the High King's visit. A tragic fire in the nursery, or a fall from the battlements, or any of a dozen scenarios that could plausibly kill an infant. Let Gottschalk's spies report the death. Let him believe he'd won, that the last Mondsilber heir was gone. And when he dropped his guard, when he pulled back his forces thinking the threat was eliminated, that's when they'd strike. The High King would return to the eastern capital, arrest Gottschalk on charges of treason, and systematically dismantle the conspiracy. Meanwhile, Heinrich would be hidden somewhere even more secure than Schattenfest, somewhere no one would think to look. And where exactly is that? Dietrich asked, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. The High King's next words confirmed it. The vampire territories. Specifically, the court of Lady Mechthild von Nackstein. She's no friend of Gottschalk's. He tried to have her killed 3 years ago when she refused to support his alliance schemes. She owes the Mondsilber line a blood debt, and she's offered sanctuary. You want me to give my son to vampires? Dietrich's voice was flat. I want you to trust that I will do anything to protect my grandson. Even make alliances with old enemies. The High King leaned forward. Lady Mechthild lost her own child to Gottschalk's machinations. She understands what's at stake. And her territory is the one place Gottschalk would never think to look for a Mondsilber heir. How long? Dietrich forced the words out. How long would Heinrich be gone? Weeks, maybe months. However long it takes to root out the conspiracy completely. The High King's expression was pained. I know what I'm asking. I know it's torture to be separated from your child. But it's the only way to keep him truly safe. Dietrich looked down at Heinrich, who was playing contentedly with a wooden toy, completely oblivious to the fact that his fate was being decided. 9 months old. Not even a year. And already his life was tangled in politics and assassination plots and impossible choices. Just like his mother's had been. I'll go with him, Dietrich said suddenly. If he goes to the vampire territories, I go too. No. The High King shook his head. You're needed here. If you disappear along with Heinrich, it will raise questions. You need to be visible, grieving, angry at the accident that took your son. You need to sell the deception. I won't send him alone. He won't be alone, Hildegard interrupted quietly. I'll go. I'll stay with him every moment. Guard him with my life. Just as I've sworn to do. Dietrich wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed against letting his son out of his sight, against trusting him to anyone else's protection. But he looked at Hildegard, at the steel in her spine, the absolute certainty in her eyes, and knew she meant every word. She'd failed to protect Adelind. She wouldn't fail to protect Heinrich. The pack needs to agree, Dietrich said finally. They swore blood oaths. This affects them too. The High King nodded, and Dietrich turned to address his wolves. They'd been listening to everything, watching the plan unfold, and now they faced the same impossible choice he did. Elder Brunhild spoke first. We swore to protect him with our lives. If this is what protection looks like, then we support it. But we want assurances, Beta Adelhard added, his voice hard. Regular reports. Proof that Heinrich is safe and well. And the moment the threat is eliminated, he comes home. No delays, no politics. He comes home. The High King inclined his head. Agreed. I'll send encrypted reports weekly. And the moment Gottschalk is neutralized, Heinrich returns to Schattenfest. One by one, the pack voiced their reluctant agreement. They hated it. Every wolf in the room hated it, but they understood the logic. Heinrich's safety had to come first, even above their desire to keep him close. The accident was staged 3 days later. They chose a fire scenario. Tragic but plausible. A candle knocked over in the nursery, old wooden furniture catching fast, smoke filling the room before anyone could respond. In the chaos and flames, a small body too burned to identify clearly, wrapped in blankets that bore Heinrich's scent. It was actually a stillborn calf from a nearby farm, but with enough ash and damage, Gottschalk's spies wouldn't look too closely. They'd see what they expected to see. A dead baby, the last Mondsilber heir eliminated by tragic accident. The real Heinrich was smuggled out the night before the fire, hidden in a supply cart leaving Schattenfest under Hildegard's protection. They'd shaved his distinctive silver-blonde hair, used herbs to temporarily darken his skin, and dressed him in common clothes. To any casual observer, he looked like an ordinary infant being transported by a traveling merchant. By the time the fire was discovered, Heinrich was already 2 days' travel away, heading for the vampire territories under heavy guard. Dietrich's grief didn't require acting. Standing in the burned nursery, looking at the tiny shrouded form that everyone believed was his son, he felt something tear open in his chest. It didn't matter that it wasn't really Heinrich. It didn't matter that his son was safe with Hildegard. The loss felt real. The separation felt like death. The pack mourned with him. They held a funeral with full honors, burning the small body in the traditional way, scattering ashes that weren't Heinrich's but represented their failure nonetheless. Another Mondsilber heir they hadn't protected well enough. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Dietrich, the High King, Beta Adelhard and Elder Brunhild. Everyone else believed the Crown Prince was truly dead. The deception worked perfectly. Within days, the High King's spies reported that Gottschalk had pulled back his forces from around Schattenfest. The threat was eliminated, the mercenaries were dismissed, the siege plans were abandoned. Gottschalk believed he'd won, which meant he never saw the trap closing around him. The High King returned to the eastern capital and began his careful, methodical work, quietly arresting Gottschalk's co-conspirators, securing evidence, building an ironclad case of treason. He moved slowly, carefully, making sure every thread of the conspiracy was identified before pulling them all tight. Meanwhile, encrypted reports arrived at Schattenfest every week, delivered by courier and written in a code only Dietrich could read. They were brief but reassuring. H thriving. Vampire court treating him well. No threats detected. H walked first steps yesterday. H says, Dada. Ch asking for his papa. That last message, arriving 6 weeks into the separation, nearly broke Dietrich. Heinrich was asking for him. His son wanted him. And Dietrich was stuck at Schattenfest, playing the grieving father, unable to go to his child without unraveling the entire deception. The pack felt his pain. They moved around him carefully, giving space but remaining present. Elder Brunhild took to sitting with him in the evenings, not speaking, just being there. Beta Adelhard threw himself into fortifying Schattenfest's defenses, determined that when Heinrich returned, he'd come home to a fortress that could withstand any threat. The breakthrough came 10 weeks after Heinrich's death. A courier arrived in the dead of night, not with the usual weekly report but with an urgent message sealed in the High King's personal wax. It's done. Gottschalk arrested. Conspiracy dismantled. Bringing H home within 3 days. Dietrich read the message twice, hardly daring to believe it. Then he summoned the handful of pack members who knew the truth and showed them. The relief was overwhelming. Tears flowed freely. Brunhild actually collapsed, sobbing into her hands. They'd done it. They'd kept Heinrich safe. And now he was coming home. The High King arrived exactly 3 days later, just after dawn, with a full escort and one precious cargo. A 10-month-old boy with silver blonde hair growing back in, amber eyes bright with intelligence, and a smile that lit up when he saw his father. Papa! Heinrich's voice was clear and joyful, arms reaching out desperately. Dietrich crossed the distance in 3 strides and swept his son into his arms, holding him so tightly Heinrich squeaked in protest. He buried his face in his son's hair, breathing in that perfect baby scent, feeling the solid weight of him, and finally, let himself break. He sobbed openly, not caring who saw, not caring about alpha dignity or royal protocols. His son was home. His son was safe. And the nightmare was over. The pack crowded around them, wolves who'd thought they'd lost their prince discovering he'd been returned to them. The morning transformed into celebration in heartbeats, grief giving way to joy so intense it felt like pain. Hildegard stood back, watching the reunion with satisfaction. She looked exhausted. 10 weeks of constant vigilance had taken their toll, but satisfied. She'd kept her promise. She'd brought Heinrich home alive and well. The High King pulled Dietrich aside once the initial chaos died down. Gottschalk has been executed. His co-conspirators are either dead or imprisoned for life. The Vampire Alliance has been officially dissolved. And I've issued a royal decree acknowledging Heinrich as my official heir and crown prince of the Eastern Realm. What about the threat? Dietrich asked. Are there others who might? There are always threats, the High King interrupted gently. Heinrich carries power that some will fear, blood that others will covet. You can't eliminate all danger. But the organized conspiracy that killed my other grandchildren, that's finished. Permanently. He looked at Heinrich, who was now being passed around the pack, each wolf touching him gently as if to confirm he was real. He'll need to spend time in the capital eventually, learning court politics, understanding his responsibilities as heir. But not yet. Let him grow up here where he's loved, where he's safe, where he can learn to be strong before he has to learn to navigate poisoned courts. How long? Dietrich asked. Until he's 15, maybe 16. The High King smiled slightly. Plenty of time for you to be his father before he has to be my heir. They stood together, watching Heinrich laugh as young wolves performed exaggerated bows to their returned prince. The baby had no idea of the sacrifice that had been made, the fear that had been endured, the separation that had torn his father apart. He only knew he was home, surrounded by pack, loved beyond measure. Adelind would be proud, the High King said quietly. Of you. Of him. Of all of this. I miss her every day, Dietrich admitted. Every moment I look at Heinrich, I see her. And it hurts. But it's also beautiful. Love is like that, the High King agreed. The best and worst thing we can experience. The thing that makes us strongest and most vulnerable all at once. He departed the next morning, leaving behind a skeleton crew of guards. Not for surveillance this time, but genuinely for protection. The relationship between Schattenfest and the Eastern Realm had been forged in fire and loss, but it was solid now. Unbreakable. Life gradually returned to something approaching normal, though normal had been redefined. Heinrich was no longer just tolerated as the Alpha's bastard. He was celebrated as crown prince and beloved pack heir. His first birthday was marked with a celebration that lasted 3 days. Wolves coming from neighboring territories to pay their respects and bring gifts. Elder Brunhild, restored to the pack council after proving herself through her devotion to Heinrich, became his primary caregiver during the day. She taught him pack songs, told him stories of shifter history, and made sure he knew he was loved from the moment he woke until he slept each night. No more crying through the nights. Now, if Heinrich woke, a dozen wolves competed for the privilege of comforting him. The years passed in this way, Heinrich growing strong and clever and kind under the pack's devoted care. When he was 4, he shifted for the first time, shockingly early, a sign of the power that ran in his blood. His wolf form was magnificent, silver-white with distinctive amber eyes, larger than any 4-year-old shifter had any right to be. The first shifting magic was real, and it was powerful. When he was 7, Dietrich judged him ready for the first part of Adelind's legacy. They went to the North Tower together, and Dietrich retrieved the hidden letter. "This is from your mother," he said gently, putting the sealed envelope in Heinrich's hands. "She wrote it before you were born. She wanted you to read it when you were old enough to understand." Heinrich held the letter reverently. At 7, he'd heard countless stories about Adelind, his beautiful brave mother who died bringing him into the world. He studied her handwriting on the envelope, tracing the letters of his name. "Can you read it to me, Papa?" So Dietrich did. His voice steady despite the pain of hearing Adelind's words again. The letter was perfect for a 7-year-old, full of love and hope, explaining in simple terms why she'd had to hide, why she'd made the choices she'd made. It ended with a promise. "There's more for you to learn when you're older, my son. More about our bloodline, our power, and the responsibility that comes with both. But for now, know this. You are loved beyond measure. You were wanted. You were hoped for. And you are exactly who you were meant to be." Heinrich cried when Dietrich finished reading, and so did Dietrich, and they held each other in the same tower where Adelind had first revealed her true identity all those years ago. The second letter, the one Adelind had hidden for Heinrich's 16th birthday, remained sealed. 9 more years before those secrets would be revealed. 9 more years of childhood before Heinrich had to face whatever heavy truths his mother had left for him. But that was future worry. For now, there was just a father and son, a pack that loved them both, and the bittersweet knowledge that sometimes the hardest sacrifices lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The night Heinrich turned 8, Dietrich found him on the battlements, staring out at the forest under moonlight. His son was growing tall, already showing signs of the powerful alpha he'd become. The silver-blonde hair he'd inherited from Adelind caught the moonlight, making him look ethereal, otherworldly. "Can't sleep?" Dietrich asked, joining him. "I was thinking about her. About Mama." Heinrich didn't look away from the forest. "Do you think she knew that it would work out? That I'd be safe?" "I think she hoped," Dietrich said carefully. "She loved you enough to die for you. Loved us both enough to trust that we'd figure it out. The pack tells stories about the night I was born. About how you let them think I was a bastard. About how they treated me. Heinrich's voice was matter-of-fact, but Dietrich heard the question underneath. Does it still hurt? What they did? Dietrich considered his answer carefully. It hurt terribly at the time. Listening to you cry night after night, knowing the pack was judging us both, knowing I couldn't explain or defend myself, it was torture. But looking back now, I'd do it all again. Every painful moment was worth it to keep you safe. Elder Brunhild cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not watching, Heinrich said quietly. When she's putting me to bed. She whispers apologies. They all carry that shame, Dietrich confirmed. They failed you when you were helpless, and they know it. The blood oaths they swore weren't just political ceremony, Heinrich. They were genuine promises born from genuine remorse. Heinrich was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question that had clearly been building. Papa, why did Mama have to die? Really? The letters say childbirth, but I've heard the healers talking. They say it shouldn't have happened. That a Shifta princess should have survived easily. Dietrich's heart clenched. His son was too perceptive, too intelligent for comfortable lies. The truth is complicated. I can handle complicated. So Dietrich told him not everything but enough. About the blood oath that prevented him from calling healers without revealing Adeline's identity. About the impossible choice between saving her life and protecting his unborn son. About how Adeline had made the decision herself, choosing Heinrich's future over her own survival. She could have lived if I'd broken the oath, Dietrich finished, his voice rough. But breaking it would have killed me instantly, and then you'd have had no protection at all. She saw the bigger picture. She always did. Heinrich's hands clenched on the stone parapet. So she died to save me. She died choosing you. Choosing your future. Choosing hope over fear. Dietrich pulled his son close. And she'd make the same choice again. I know that with absolute certainty. They stood together in silence, watching the moon track across the sky. Then Heinrich said something that made Dietrich's breath catch. When I'm old enough, when I'm Alpha and Crown Prince, I'm going to change the laws. The ones that let packs ignore crying babies. The ones that punish children for circumstances they didn't create. I'm going to make it so no other child ever has to cry alone in the dark. That's a worthy goal, Dietrich said softly, pride swelling in his chest. Your mother would love that. And I'm going to find every other hidden bloodline conspiracy, Heinrich continued, his young voice taking on steel. Every plot like the one that killed Mama's siblings. I'm going to root them out and destroy them. So no other family has to lose what we lost. Dietrich looked at his 8-year-old son and saw the king he'd become. Strong, compassionate, determined to use his power for protection rather than domination. Adeline's legacy lived in every word Heinrich spoke. You'll make a great king, Dietrich said. When the time comes. I don't want to be king, Heinrich admitted. I want to stay here. With you and the pack. This is home. I know. But sometimes our responsibilities call us to places we don't want to go. Your mother knew that. She was running from her destiny when she came here, and look what happened. She found love, had you, and set in motion changes that will ripple through the realm for generations. Heinrich leaned against his father, and for a moment he was just a child again, not a crown prince bearing the weight of 2 bloodlines. Will you come with me? When I have to go to the capital? Always, Dietrich promised. Wherever you go, however far, I'm your father first and Alpha second. You'll never face your destiny alone. The years continued to pass, each one bringing Heinrich closer to his eventual role while allowing him to remain grounded in Schattenfest's love and stability. He trained with the pack warriors, learning combat and strategy. He studied with the Eastern Realm tutors, absorbing history and politics. He worked alongside common wolves, learning empathy and understanding. By the time he was 12, Heinrich was already taller than most adults, his frame filling out with muscle, his features settling into a striking combination of Dietrich's strength and Adeline's ethereal beauty. His control over his shifting magic was remarkable. He could hold partial transformations for hours, something most adult shifters struggled with. The first shifting magic was manifesting in other ways too. Heinrich could sense emotions with uncanny accuracy, could influence pack dynamics with barely a thought, could communicate with animals that weren't shifters. Elder Astrid, who'd been documenting his development meticulously, declared him the most magically powerful shifter born in 4 centuries. Which meant, of course, that new threats began to emerge. They came subtly at first. Merchants passing through Schattenfest who asked too many questions about the young crown prince. Travelers who seemed to have no real business in the territory but lingered near the fortress. Small incidents, a training accident that nearly injured Heinrich, food that tasted slightly off, a saddle strap that had been carefully weakened. Nothing conclusive. Nothing they could prove was an attack. But Hildegard, ever vigilant, saw the pattern. "Someone's testing our defenses," she told Dietrich privately. "Probing for weaknesses. They're being careful, patient. But they're definitely targeting Heinrich." "Gottschalk's conspiracy is dead," Dietrich said. "Who else would?" The vampire factions that opposed Lady Mechthild's decision to shelter Heinrich. Rogue shifters who see his power as a threat. Human hunters who've heard rumors of the first shifting magic and want to study it. Hildegard's expression was grim. "Take your pick. Heinrich's existence is known throughout the supernatural world now. And powerful things attract dangerous attention. They increase security but carefully. Heinrich was 12. Old enough to notice if they suddenly smothered him with protection. Instead, they trained him harder, taught him to be aware of his surroundings, helped him develop the paranoia that would keep him alive in hostile environments. Heinrich took to the training with focused intensity. He'd heard the stories of his mother's assassination, of his siblings who'd been killed. He understood he was a target, and rather than let fear control him, he turned it into fuel for improvement. The real attack came on Heinrich's 13th birthday. The pack had gathered for celebration, a massive feast in the Great Hall, hundreds of wolves from Schattenfest and neighboring territories, all come to honor their crown prince's entrance into adolescence. The mood was joyful, unguarded. Everyone relaxed. Which was exactly what the attackers had been waiting for. They came during the feast, bursting through doors and windows simultaneously. 30 attackers in full combat gear, moving with military precision. Not random mercenaries this time, but trained warriors with a specific objective. Capture Heinrich alive. The attack should have succeeded. The element of surprise, the superior numbers, the careful planning, it should have been enough. But the attackers made one critical mistake. They underestimated just how fiercely Schattenfest's pack would fight for their prince. The pack's response was instantaneous and devastating. Warriors shifted mid-leap, intercepting attackers before they reached Heinrich. Elder Brunhild, 70 years old and supposedly past her prime, took down 2 attackers with brutal efficiency. Beta Adelhard put himself between Heinrich and an incoming blade, taking a wound meant for the prince without hesitation. And Heinrich himself, 13 years old and flooded with adrenaline, shifted for the first time in combat. His wolf form exploded outward, larger than any adult wolf in the room, silver-white fur gleaming like moonlight, eyes blazing with amber fire. The first shifting magic manifested fully, and suddenly Heinrich wasn't just a 13-year-old boy defending himself. He was an apex predator with centuries of accumulated power flowing through his veins. 3 attackers went for him simultaneously. Heinrich tore through them like they were made of paper. The battle lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, 15 attackers were dead, 10 were captured, and 5 had fled into the forest where Hildegard's outer guards were hunting them down. The pack had taken casualties too. Beta Adelhard's wound was serious, several warriors were injured, and 2 young wolves who tried to protect Heinrich had been killed. But Heinrich was alive and unharmed, standing in his massive wolf form over the bodies of attackers who'd thought they could capture him. The aftermath was sobering. They interrogated the captured attackers and learned the truth. This hadn't been an isolated incident. Multiple factions had formed a temporary alliance, united by their fear and hatred of what Heinrich represented. The first shifting magic was too powerful, too unpredictable. They wanted it controlled or eliminated. "This won't be the last attack," Hildegard said flatly, studying the intelligence they'd extracted. "They'll keep coming. Bigger forces, better planning. As long as Heinrich remains accessible, he'll be a target." "Then we make him less accessible," Dietrich said. "We fortify further. No." Heinrich's voice cut through the planning session. He stood in the doorway, still blood-stained from the battle, his young face set with determination. "We don't hide. We don't cower. We send a message." "You're 13, Dietrich began. "I'm the crown prince of the Eastern Realm and heir to the most powerful bloodline in existence," Heinrich interrupted. His eyes blazed gold. "And tonight I proved I'm not some helpless child who needs constant protection. I killed to defend my pack. I bled for my people. And I'm done pretending I'm too young to be part of these decisions." Dietrich looked at his son and felt pride war with fear. Heinrich was right. He wasn't a child anymore, not after tonight. The battle had forced him to cross a threshold, and there was no going back. "What message do you want to send?" Dietrich asked carefully. "That attacking me has consequences. That Schattenfest doesn't forgive threats to its prince. That anyone who comes for me will face not just my power, but the unified strength of my pack." Heinrich moved to the table, studying the maps and intelligence reports. "We find whoever organized this attack. We dismantle their operation completely. And we make sure every supernatural faction in existence understands that the Mondsilber heir is not prey to be hunted." "That's a declaration of war," Hildegard observed. "No," Heinrich corrected. "It's a declaration of strength. We're not attacking anyone unprovoked. But we're making it clear that provocation will be met with overwhelming retaliation." Over the next weeks, they implemented Heinrich's strategy. The captured attackers revealed their employers, a coalition of vampire lords, rogue shifter packs, and human hunter families. Dietrich sent formal declarations to each faction: cease all action against Crown Prince Heinrich, or face the combined might of the Eisenwolf pack and the Eastern Realm. Most backed down immediately. The sight of a 13-year-old shifter taking down trained warriors in combat had spread quickly through supernatural networks. The rumors about the first shifting magic grew more elaborate with each telling, and fear was a powerful deterrent. But 3 factions refused. They saw Heinrich's youth as weakness, his declaration as arrogance from an inexperienced prince. They learned their mistake painfully. Hildegard led the retaliation with surgical precision, Heinrich and select Schattenfest warriors at her side. They struck each faction's stronghold in sequence, dismantling operations, freeing prisoners who'd been held for experimentation, and making very public examples of the leadership who'd refused to stand down. Heinrich participated in all of it, learning the harsh realities of power and protection. He saw what happened when you tried to control or study supernatural bloodlines through force. He witnessed the cruelty inflicted on captured shifters and magical creatures. And he understood, viscerally, why his mother had been willing to die to keep him away from such people. By the time they returned to Schattenfest 6 weeks later, the supernatural world had a new understanding. Crown Prince Heinrich von Mondsilber was not to be trifled with. He carried his mother's compassion, but his father's ruthlessness when protecting those he loved. The attacks stopped, not because the fear and jealousy went away, but because the cost of acting on those feelings had been made devastatingly clear. Heinrich's 14th and 15th years passed more peacefully. He continued growing in power and wisdom, preparing for his eventual role as king while remaining grounded in Schattenfest's values. He formed his own inner circle, young wolves who'd trained alongside him, who'd proven their loyalty in combat, who understood the weight he carried. Elder Brunhild, now in her late 70s, began teaching him the political intricacies he'd need at court. "Fighting is easy," she'd say with her characteristic bluntness. "Any fool with claws can fight. Navigating court politics without losing your soul, that's the real challenge." Heinrich absorbed everything. his sharp mind cataloging strategies and counter-strategies, learning to see 3 moves ahead in social chess matches. He practiced maintaining masks, hiding his true thoughts while projecting whatever image served his purposes. But with his pack, he remained simply Heinrich, the boy who'd cried through so many nights, the prince they'd learned to love, the future they'd sworn to protect. The night before his 16th birthday, Dietrich took Heinrich back to the North Tower one final time. "You know what tomorrow is," Dietrich said, holding the second sealed letter Adeline had left. "You're ready for this now. Whatever she wanted to tell you." Heinrich took the letter with steady hands. At 16, he stood eye level with his father, broad-shouldered and powerful, every inch the alpha prince he'd been born to be. But his hands trembled slightly as he broke his mother's seal. They read it together in the flickering candlelight. "My dearest Heinrich, if you're reading this, you've survived to 16. You've grown into the man I dreamed you'd become. And you're ready to understand the full truth about what you are and what's expected of you. The first shifting magic that runs in our bloodline isn't just powerful, it's essential. The shifter world is slowly dying, Heinrich. The magic has been diluting for centuries, weakening with each generation. Within 500 years, shifting ability will fade entirely from most bloodlines. The old power will be gone, unless someone stops it. The Mondsilber line was kept pure specifically for this purpose. We are the genetic key to restoring what's been lost. Your children, properly paired with other pure bloodlines, can begin reversing the dilution, can bring the first shifting magic back into the world. This is why so many want to control or destroy us. We represent change, unpredictability, a shift in power dynamics that's existed for centuries. Those who've built empires on the weakened magic fear what will happen when true power returns. You'll face a choice, my son. You can hide your power, breed it out through careful political marriages, let the bloodline dilute naturally over generations. That's the safe path, the easy path. Or you can be what you were born to be, a catalyst for change. You can actively work to restore the first shifting magic to all shifter bloodlines. You can use your power not just for personal gain or political maneuvering, but for the salvation of our entire species. It won't be easy. You'll make enemies of those who profit from weakness. You'll face opposition from unexpected quarters. You'll have to be stronger, smarter, and more determined than anyone who came before you. But I know you can do it. I felt your power even before you were born. I saw your potential in every moment I carried you. And I chose to die bringing you into this world because I still believe, that you're exactly what the shifter world needs. Your father will support you no matter what you choose. So will your pack. But the choice must be yours alone. King or catalyst. Political figure or revolutionary. Safe mediocrity or dangerous greatness. Choose wisely, my beloved son. But more importantly, choose truly. Don't let fear or obligation dictate your path. Be who you're meant to be, whoever that is. I love you across death and time. And I'm so proud of the man you've become. Forever your mother, Adeline. Heinrich finished reading and sat in silence for a long time. The weight of his mother's words, the expectation and hope she'd placed on him, the massive responsibility of potentially saving their entire species. It was overwhelming. "Did you know," he finally asked Dietrich, "about the bloodline dilution? The species dying?" "I suspected," Dietrich admitted. Astrid had mentioned studies showing weakening magic across generations. But I didn't know it was this severe. Or that you were specifically bred to reverse it. "I wasn't just born," Heinrich said slowly. "I was engineered. Mama and the High King kept the bloodline pure specifically to create me. To create someone powerful enough to be this genetic savior. Does that make your existence less meaningful?" Dietrich asked gently. "You were still wanted, still loved. Your mother's feelings were genuine, not calculated. But my purpose was predetermined." Heinrich stood, pacing the small tower room. "I'm not just a prince who happens to have power. I'm a weapon designed to reshape the supernatural world. You're a person, Dietrich corrected firmly. With choices and free will. Yes, you carry power that could change everything. But how you use that power, if you use it at all, is entirely up to you. Heinrich moved to the window, staring out at Schattenfest's grounds. Somewhere below, his pack was sleeping, secure in the protection he provided. Young wolves who'd grow up in a world shaped by his choices. If I do nothing, Heinrich said slowly, if I choose the safe path and let the bloodline dilute naturally through political marriages, what happens? Eventually, shifters become myths. Our children or grandchildren might be the last generation with true shifting ability. After that, just faint echoes of magic, maybe some enhanced physical traits, but nothing more. And if I try to restore the first shifting magic, you'll face opposition from every power structure that exists, Dietrich said bluntly. Vampire lords who've maintained dominance because shifters have been weakening. Human governments who find diluted shifters easier to control. Even shifter packs that fear change. You'll be challenging centuries of established order. But the alternative is extinction. Heinrich's voice was certain now. Slow, gradual extinction of everything that makes us special. Yes. Heinrich was quiet for another moment. Then he smiled, sharp and determined, so much like Adelind that Dietrich's breath caught. Then I guess I'm choosing revolution. Mama didn't die to give birth to someone who'd play it safe. You're sure? No, Heinrich admitted. I'm terrified. But I'm sure that doing nothing would be worse than trying and failing. Dietrich crossed to his son and pulled him into a tight embrace. Then we'll do it together. You, me, and everyone at Schattenfest who swore to protect you. You're not fighting this battle alone. The High King will have opinions, Heinrich said. His voice muffled against Dietrich's shoulder. The High King can deal with it. You're his heir. He'll support you eventually. Even if he argues first. They stood together in the tower as dawn approached. Father and son planning the first steps of a revolution that would reshape the supernatural world. It was ambitious. It was dangerous. It was probably going to get them both killed. But it was also necessary. And if there was one thing both the Eisenwolf and Mondsilber bloodlines had proven, it was that they thrived on necessary impossibilities. The next morning, on his 16th birthday, Crown Prince Heinrich von Mondsilber stood before his assembled pack and made a declaration that would echo through history. I am the last carrier of the pure first shifting magic. My mother died to bring me into this world, and she did so believing I could save our dying species. I won't let her sacrifice be in vain. Starting today, Schattenfest becomes more than just a fortress. It becomes the center of a movement to restore what we've lost. We're going to bring the first shifting magic back to all shifter bloodlines, whatever the cost. The pack responded with a roar that shook the ancient stones of Schattenfest's walls. They'd sworn blood oaths to protect their prince. Now they'd follow him into revolution. The High King, informed of Heinrich's decision by urgent courier, arrived at Schattenfest 3 days later with fire in his eyes and a lecture prepared. But when he saw Heinrich, 16 years old, standing tall and certain, surrounded by a pack united in purpose, the lecture died on his lips. You're just like your mother, the High King said finally, resignation and pride mixing in his voice. Impossible to argue with once you've made up your mind. Will you support me? Heinrich asked directly. The High King studied his grandson for a long moment. What you're proposing will start wars. Plural. Every established power will see you as a threat. I know. You'll be challenged, attacked, possibly killed. I know. And you're going to do it anyway. Yes. The High King sighed deeply, then smiled, the first genuine smile Dietrich had seen from him. Then I suppose I'd better help you not die in the process. The Eastern Realm officially supports Crown Prince Heinrich's initiative to restore the first shifting bloodlines. Let our enemies come. We'll face them together. And so began the movement that would later be known as the Mondsilber Revolution, a decades-long effort to restore pure shifter magic to a dying species. It started small, with careful breeding programs and magical research. Heinrich worked tirelessly, studying ancient texts, consulting with the oldest shifters alive, experimenting with ways to strengthen bloodlines without forcing anyone into unwanted pairings. It wasn't perfect. They made mistakes. There was opposition, sometimes violent. Heinrich narrowly survived 3 more assassination attempts before he turned 20. 2 of his closest friends died protecting him. The cost was high and constant. But slowly, gradually, the tides began to turn. Heinrich's children, born from a carefully chosen mate who carried complementary bloodlines, showed remarkable power. So did the children of other pure blood pairings he facilitated. Within a generation, measurable increases in shifter magic were documented across multiple territories. Within 2 generations, the first shifting magic had spread to dozens of bloodlines. Within 3, it had become common enough that the threat of extinction had been eliminated. Heinrich lived to see his great-grandchildren shift for the first time with power that rivaled his own. He watched Schattenfest grow from a single fortress into a thriving center of shifter culture and magical learning. He saw the supernatural world transform from one of weakening magic and dying bloodlines into something vibrant and powerful again. And through it all, he remembered the mother who'd died to give him life, the father who'd endured shame to protect him, the pack that had learned to love him after first failing him, the blood oaths and sacrifices and impossible choices that had brought him to this moment. Late one night, 63 years old and feeling the weight of decades of revolution, Heinrich climbed to the North Tower where his parents had first fallen in love. He looked out over the territory that had shaped him, raised him, protected him. And he whispered a prayer to a mother he'd never known but had carried with him every day of his life. "I did it, Mama. I chose revolution just like you hoped I would. And it worked. We're not dying anymore. The first shifting magic lives." The wind carried his words away into the night, and somewhere in the darkness, Heinrich could swear he felt a presence. Warm and gentle, moonflowers and winter frost, a mother's pride reaching across death itself. She'd asked him to be brave, to choose truth over comfort, revolution over safety. And Heinrich, the baby who'd cried through so many nights before his pack understood his worth,